Okay, so our next panel is going to be about how the primal continuum is related to attachment, bonding, and trauma. So our moderator today is Claudia Ford. She has a PhD in environmental studies and is a professor in environmental humanities and international business ethics. She is a mother of 4. She is an ethnobotanist. She is an advocate of sustainable agriculture. She's a musician, writer, visual artist, and many, many other things. Thank you. Everyone give a round of applause for Claudia.
Hi, everybody. My panel is getting itself together. I'm mic'd, so thank you. And I want to give them an opportunity to get up here. I actually want to give all of you a round of applause for being here, for your listening, for your attention to what's going on, for your very insightful questions and comments. I think it's really, I think I can speak on behalf of the entire panel as saying it's an honor to be here, to sit here. It's also an honor to sit in the audience. So thank you to all of you. Let's wait 2 seconds for our, yay, here we go. So I would like to start with gratitude and thanks. I'm sitting right now on this slightly raised platform with 4 amazing women whose stories you're about to hear. I want to thank panel 3 for going first. We did that on purpose. We wanted your food to be fully digested before we started this panel. And that's because this is, all the panels are talking about difficult issues, but this panel particularly was charged with talking about the traumatic effects of the relationships that occur when this primal continuum of human development does not get the care that it needs. So we're talking about trauma, and you will hear stories. We'll be talking, some of us, about our own trauma. So from a personal point of view and from a professional point of view of dealing with trauma that is directly related to the perinatal period. And I want to thank panel 3 for allowing us to go now that we've settled down a little bit after lunch. The way I'd like to do this is I'll say a few introductory words, and then I'm going to turn it over to my fellow panel members and sister panel members. My name is Claudia. I go by the pronouns she and her. I think it's important to disrupt and really do a critical analysis of language and dialogue. That's been a part of my research. And I think it's particularly important for a community that's talking about peace and nonviolence to watch the peace and nonviolence of our language, and to acknowledge that the binary of male and female is not the only way to talk about childbirth. In my own work, I started, the reason I'm up here is because I met Suzanne Arms and Molly 41 years ago. I was pregnant, and Suzanne asked if she could film my birth, and I said no. And we're still friends. And I gave birth. I had 3 boys, all of them at home, thanks to some very wonderful midwives. I also began at that point studying midwifery because the experience was so important to me that I actually chose, instead of going to medical school, to go directly into midwifery as a direct entry midwife. I gave birth to 3 boy children at home, and as boys of color, as Black men, I was particularly concerned with what their life was after that, after the birth process. So even though I had an ideal birth process, I do not live in a society that is ideal for them. So we spent 30 years abroad after that. I left, I ran out of the society and had no intention of bringing them back. I came back 8 years ago because our family adopted a little girl from South Africa who had been brutally raped at age 5 months, gang raped. And so my reason for being here is not just because I know Suzanne and I'm committed to midwifery and I've helped women deliver, but also because I was suddenly confronted when my youngest son was 15 and the oldest was 27 with a real life case of birth trauma. And I'm happy to I'm putting that story forward because some of you may want to talk to me afterwards about it. I've written a movie about it. A Canadian crew did a documentary about it, and I'm happy to talk about that. But mostly as a context for what we're going to talk about, to say that the effects of this trauma, this little girl who had no parenting for 5 months and then a brutal assault, and the ways in which not only it affected our family, but continues to affect her every single day. So everything that we've heard about how important those first few hours are, imagine a life for which you did not have any of that security for 5 full months. And the brain damage, I call it brain damage, that it caused in terms of every part of her system, learning and understanding trust and love. And it has been the pleasure, my pleasure and my son's pleasure, to continually, every single day, try to teach that to her. But it is indeed a teaching. What I would like to do is ask the panelists, after I introduce you, to share what you would like all of us to know about your journey, and especially about how you have helped both yourself and other people through the effects, these really critical things that we're seeing around what happens when this doesn't quite go right, the trauma that comes in, and of course, how do we heal that trauma? Where's the hope? How do we go forward? I'm going to start with Dr. Malika Morissette Bonaparte, sorry. Malika is a doctor in clinical psychology. She specializes in the perinatal phase, so clients who are pregnant or new parents. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist. She specializes has a special focus on anxiety, whether it's generalized anxiety or phobias, including fear of birth, OCD, panic attacks, and mood disorders, including pre- and postpartum depression and bipolar disorder for both women and for men. And her research has been on the transition to parenthood. So thank you, Malika.
I would like to start and continue with this gratitude process of being here. I think it is great to have the chance and opportunity to share all of these resources. And let's dig into trauma, which is something very important because it shapes every single second of the remainder of lives of people who go through trauma. And what I want to bring here is the fact that there are things that can be done. In the perinatal phase, so from preconception to all the way up to 2 years postpartum and maybe more than that, is a great phase, both where a lot of trauma happens, but also where we can heal a lot of trauma. So in my practice, in psychology, we see that the perinatal phase is this moment, is this shift. And it creates a platform where many changes can happen. And as a psychologist, it's something that we can really use to go forward and bring these women or men, these new families into this new part of their life. And I'm sorry, I guess I forgot a little bit about what was the initial question.
I really just want to give you the opportunity for the audience to know who you are so that they can ask questions. Anything about your life that you'd like to share?
Right. And I think that one thing that comes to my mind when I think about the perinatal phase, and as someone who has the chance to work with people in that phase, is the word love. And I've realized that as a practitioner, the one key that really truly helps and facilitates this whole process is through opening our hearts and being with, being present, working with. And the practice that I have is to me, it's very important to go hand in hand with the person, working together with common objectives to go forward, transcend what has happened, what are the traumas, because there are a lot. So in post-traumatic stress disorder after a birth, for example, there are a lot of things that can be used. So earlier we were talking a bit about, how things can go wrong, and I think that if we have the chance to bring more and more workers to help heal and work with these traumas. I also work with the emotional freedom technique, which is a technique that is used to rewire the brain. And it's very, very powerful when we compare that to just normal talk therapy. So EFT is where we do tapping. Maybe you've seen this or heard. And it helps by doing the tapping, it helps to calm the nervous system. And then by talking about what has happened or by talking about all the negatives and doing this, it keeps the body and the mind calm. And then that allows people to go forward and then create new neural pathways. So all of these tools that are great, there's a lot of them. I think that it's worth talking about and making sure there are resources to put forward these great ways to help work and decrease all of the negative impact that trauma can have.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you very much. And then our next panelist is Ilka and Braunstein.
That's
okay.
Almost right.
Thank you. And Ilka was born and raised in Germany. She has a BA in marketing and has worked as a journalist. Mm-hmm. She's a certified yoga teacher. She's a certified birth doula and perinatal health coach. She's a birth activist. And a lot of her work, as we'll hear, has to do with birth and sexuality. And she's an advocate for healthy, intimate relationships and parent-child bonding and for women generally. So Ilka, welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to share a little bit about why am I here and why am I called to be a birth activist. I have been working as a birth doula mostly in hospitals. And I'm working with pregnant women every week in my classes, yoga classes and couples classes and pregnancy and childbirth classes. And I hear about a lot of drama. And I have had my own birth trauma being a C-section because I wanted to come out with my butt first. So a breech baby, C-section, was separated from my mom for 7 hours and never got breastfed. But I never was really aware of that drama until now, and I'm 34. So just in the last couple of years, through being in that work, being a doula and working postpartum with women, I got aware of my own trauma that has happened and have worked through a lot with my parents and my mom about that, which was also pretty dramatic for her, and I never had the chance to ever talk with her about it. So when I was at my maybe 12th or 13th birth, I had to fight a doctor. And with fighting, I really mean like being a ninja doula. Being a ninja doula in the sense of having to almost yell at nurses and having to yell to get people out of the room so that my mom, the mom that I was with, could be having her baby on her hands and knees just as she wanted it to and not be forcefully turned over to her back and forcefully have episiotomy. Unfortunately, that did happen. And it was very traumatizing for me to see that. And it was for me just like witnessing a woman being raped and not being able to stand up for her. And that lingered with me. And I have very good friends in the doula community that helped me work through all these things, because it kept on happening every single time I was with a woman in a hospital setting. And last year, November, was when I first contacted Suzanne, because I got really inspired by the movie Suffragette, I don't know exactly the name. But there was two women that stood up and fought to have the right to vote. And there was a scene in the movie where a woman got raped and another woman had to witness it. She was forced to witness it. And it just stabbed me in my heart. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing every single time I'm in the hospital with a woman. And I am not able to stand up and say anything, because they're just telling me, who are you? Get the heck out. And so I decided to go away from the path of being a doula to becoming a midwife, so that I have the chance to stand up and actually say something and get more women out of the hospital. But I also got very inspired because I understood that it doesn't actually need that many people to make a change. And in 1918, it was 2 women that stood up and died for their cause, which hopefully I don't have to. But it inspired me so much that I called the next day Suzanne and said, I want to work with you. And ever since, I am with the Birth Keepers. And it has been just quite a fantastic journey to go deeper into that topic and to see what is happening all over the US and how we can work together to be able to have good referrals, have good support, and get women out of the trauma and back into healing and back into help. Right now, I'm focusing mostly on work with couples. I'm also working in the postpartum, helping couples and moms to transition into parenthood, especially with the aspect of sexuality and how to keep the intimacy and how to stay sexy with each other and have a good bond, not just with the baby, but also with each other, so that we can provide a healthy family situation so that the baby can grow up in a healthy family. So yeah, that's about me.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist, Diana Soto. She's a Chicana Chihene Apache teacher, an activist. She's a mother, she's a grandmother, she's a farmer, she's a seed saver, and she's a midwife and has supported women with birth and breastfeeding. And she's doing some interesting work that I hope she'll talk to us about with indigenous first foods. And she's a board member of the Oregon Intertribal Breastfeeding Coalition. Diana, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for all the presenters and everybody here. I'm very eternally grateful. What brought me here is intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, being Native American. My first pregnancy was at 16 years old, and the baby was stillborn. Second baby that was born at 18 was a cesarean section, and they cut me from my belly button down to my pubic bone, took out one ovary and half of the other one, and told me I couldn't conceive anymore. So then I moved to Tucson, met a guy, hooked up with him, and he introduced me to my Sundance family, my Tioshpae, that we got together. And I started going to Black Mesa Sundance for many years, and at the beginning of that, I wanted to have more babies. I was really devastated that I had been sterilized, because they had been sterilizing Native American women, African American women, South American women up and through the late 80s. And even today, it is still happening. We are still dealing with genocide today, only it's a little more innocuous and subtle, and masked. So I went to a ceremony, and I went to my elders, and I asked them to pray for me because I wanted to have children. So they put me in a sweat lodge, and if anyone knows the sweat lodge, you go in 4 rounds. Well, these grandmas kept me in for 8 rounds. And they prayed for me, and they said they grew my ovaries back. And they told me that if I, got these ovaries back, that I would have to then do the birth work. I didn't know what that meant. I'm like, okay, that's great, Well, the guy I conceived my son at that Sundance at that time. But the guy was a domestic violator. And that's another reason why I'm here, is because I was a part of this domestic violence situation. So one particularly bad day where I got my lip punched in front of my 4-year-old daughter at the time. And I ran out, and I took her to school, and then I went to Native Seed Search, where I started my seed work. And I asked them to stick me in a room where I could volunteer by myself so I didn't have to deal with people. I had a fat lip and a broken heart and a pregnant belly, and I didn't know what the heck was going to happen. So as I'm cleaning these seeds, this woman approaches me. And so she comes closer to me, and I move away from her. And then she gets closer to me, and I was cornered. There was a wall, and I couldn't move anymore because I was scared. You know what I mean? I was just traumatized. So I was trying not to make eye contact, and she leaned in a little closer, and I leaned a little further, and there was nowhere for me to go. There was a reason this woman was in my space. And she said to me, I know you're pregnant, and I know he hits you. And I lost it. I just started bawling right on the spot. I was like, how does this bitch know? That was, what was that, right? Well, this woman turned out to be one of the most important people in my life. She was a midwife. She is a midwife. I still consider her that. Her name's Laura Pierce. I will drop her name because this woman then gave me the most excellent cliche midwifery book on the planet, which is, of course, Spiritual Midwifery. I had no idea. I had been socialized to be afraid of birth. I had been socialized to be afraid of pain. There has been so much commentary on that today. So I read this book, and I clung on to it like it was my life. And I read it, and we got rid of the domestic violator for my time of my pregnancy. And I read this book, and she took care of me, took me to Santana concerts, just really took good care of me because I was a wreck. And I had fear from my previous deliveries. Child died. My second one was a C-section. I didn't know what I was dealing with. So she walked me through the process. So this guy comes back a month later, and I thought, well, he's been gone 6 months. All right, fine. So he came back in, and one night, I hear, I kicked into labor. I had never experienced natural labor. And so I started feeling these contractions, and at first I was like, oh, I must be a little constipated. I didn't know what it was. I hadn't been told what I was experiencing. And then as I realized and timed, I'm like, oh, this is it. So as I'm going through my rocking process and following all the rules in the book in my head, just trying to do that, my neighbor Cindy, who was a crack addict but took care of me too during my pregnancy, she used to bring me a lot of food. I could hear this guy at her door pounding, bam, 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 open the door, I'll kill you. And I'm like, crap, my friend Cindy's in trouble. So I'm in labor, and all of a sudden I'm in my head. I am no longer in my bottom. My brains were up here rather than my butt. So I tell the donor, I'm like, dude, go help her. And he's like, no. So he hid in the back of the house. And I'm like, what a loser. Wow, what am I doing with this guy? So then I'm like, well, forget you. So I go out the door, and I pound on my neighbor, not the neighbor who has the invader, but I go to across the other neighbors. I'm like knocking on the door. I can hear the TV. I can hear them whispering, but they wouldn't answer the damn door. I'm like, who are you people? So then I go to another neighbor's, no answer. I go to the landlord's, no answer. So I take a deep breath. Meanwhile, I'm having contractions, So then I take a deep breath, and I go to this apartment, and I pound it on the door. Bam, bam, bam. This is the police. Come out with your hands up. And I said that, and I ran to this tree, and I had the most gripping rush contraction I'd ever had that just dropped me to my knees. I'm gripping this palm tree. Its palm fronds are poking in my face, and I'm breathing, and this dude jumps out of the apartment and runs. And, I'm over here, gripping this tree to death. I'm like, okay. So then I crawl back to my apartment and I go to sleep and I make the dude sleep in the living room. And then the midwife comes over the next day and I'm sitting there bummed out. Like I didn't know what was going on. I felt very like a victim. I was scared, not to diminish victimization because it's real. But I was just all sad, and she sat in front of me and she reflected my face. That's how I was. I was just really pouty, pooty, sad. And I saw her reflecting that, and I'm like, oh, hell no, that's not what the book said. Ina May was talking about your attitude, to shift your attitude. So I'm like, okay. So I threw on some Ziggy Marley, and I started dancing. And so then I started dancing in labor, and for the next 5 hours, I danced to this reggae rhythm that just sat with me beautifully. Then I put powwow music on, and I started powwow dancing to this music. And after a few hours, I just looked at them and I'm like, I need to sit down. So they propped up all these pillows and I went to that pillow space, and then the midwife and the donor were having some lunch or something. So I sat there like this with my legs wide open, my arms like this, and breathing through each rush, coming at me like a freight train. 3 minutes, 1 minute, and they were one after the other. And then all of a sudden as I'm sitting there, I feel his bones go clunk. I felt his bones rub against the inside of my bones. I will never, he's 24, I will never forget that feeling, ever. So then all of a sudden when that happened, I looked at my midwife, I'm like, get me up, I have to go poop now. So they both grabbed me by the arms, we start walking, and then time froze. And then all of a sudden my water went whoosh. This ocean of water just rushed out of me, and then all of a sudden I'm like, ugh, growling like a bear, because all this rush is just kicking my, I'm like, oh man, get me to the toilet now. So they take me to the toilet, and I'm sitting there, and Laura's rubbing my back, and then I just started growling harder, and she's like, stop. I'm like, I can't. So she reaches down underneath, and she's like, oh no, honey, you got to get up. Your baby's head is right there. And I'm like, what? Okay. So she lifts me up, and I don't know. What do I know? So I start waddling my way this way to the bed, my legs wide open because I didn't want to smash his head because I didn't know any better. So finally they got me to the bed, and I wasn't pushing. My body was doing it. All of a sudden I had to engage in my own body's intelligence. Now that was revolutionary for me at that time. Because guess what, folks? Our bodies are super intelligent if we get our dumb brains out of the way. The programming that we have endured throughout time recent is just baloney. So anyway, I let my body do its thing, and as he started crowning, it felt like there was a lighter against my clit. And I just, my eyes are wide open, and I'm looking at my midwife, and I am begging her I'm like, I gotta stop. No, really, I just need to stop. And she's like, no, honey, you can't stop. Your baby's head is right there. And I'm like, well, push him back in. I'm like, let's just stop. She said, no, take a deep breath. I took a deep breath. I pushed through that burning sensation, and his head was there. And I was like relieved. And then she's like, and I'm like, can we stop now? And she's like, well, no, honey, we got to get the rest of the baby out. I'm like, all right, fine. So, the next rush came, and he slid right out, and I scooped him up, and I put him against my breast. He latched on in a second, and the donor tried to, take a look and get all in there, and I kicked him. I'm like, get the fuck away from me, dude. And I covered this baby with my whole body. I'm like, get away from me, get away from me. And, Laura stepped in, and she told him, you need to go. You need to leave her alone right now. And so she set the space of that sacredness. And when I had that baby, I understood what my elders said when they said, you need to do the birth work. You need to do the birth work. So then I started training with her as a midwife. Now we're here to talk about trauma because there's a follow-up to this. I had some nice home births after that with my other children, with my husband, baby's daddy, Henry. He's a different father from the other three, the last three. Wonderful guy. And I ended up having nice births with him. But the thing about it is that the first baby died. The second one was a C-section. The third was part of a domestically violent situation. The C-section baby now is a drug addict. She's been on the streets. I haven't seen hide nor hair of her in 3 years at all. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know. And then she had her baby, my granddaughter, who's the absolute love of my life. And then my son, James, is in prison. Yeah. And the other three who I had really, loving husband, loving, caretaking the work, they're great. They're not in prison, they're not in jail, they're not in trouble. They're working, they're going to school, they're really successful people. So, I know because of those difficult first births, that's why they're in those places where they're at. So my work is to work with Indigenous women to re-socialize them, because we have been bombarded with colonialization. We have been abused, and we're still being abused. Right now, we're being attacked nutritionally. Nutritional genocide is at the peak of us right now. So the work I'm doing is first foods, Indigenous first foods, reclaiming our first foods and feeding it to our community so our babies can be born healthy and strong with the foods and nutrition that comes from us. Because this GMO crap that we're all being fed, we're all being poisoned. We're all being poisoned. So that is why I'm here today.
Thank you, and I'm so glad our panel got the birth story. So thank you for that. I'm really pleased to introduce Gabrielle McSherry. She's a senior at Rhode Island School of Design in sculpture, and she's taught art in Nepal. She's traveled widely. She lived in the Netherlands. She's written a pamphlet, an essay that I think is here, and she'll tell you a bit about that. She's passionate about menstrual and reproductive health issues, abuse and trauma, and I happen to know it's not on here, also about medicinal plants. So, Gabrielle, welcome.
Thank you. I'm not sure if is my mic working? Okay. Well, I also identify as a woman, and I use the pronouns her and she, and I also wanted to follow Claudia in bringing that attention, because I don't think every female-bodied, visible-looking woman identifies or female-bodied looks like a woman identifies with those pronouns, and I do. So it's important. I also want to bring attention to the fact that I'm the daughter of Nicole and the granddaughter of Brigida and Helen. And I think that I'm here to share my story because I want to also read a quote by Faith Ringgold, which is, "I can't tell your story, I can only tell mine. I can't be you, I can only be me." Which I think is really important, because as an artist, I'm constantly exploring who I am through my work, and what I am, what my identity is, what my story is, what my history is. And I am the daughter of a beautiful, intelligent woman, but also I'm the daughter of a sex worker, a stripper, who at a very early age was sexually abused, and then at a not so much later, she was becoming a sex worker, and she was stripping to make money. And up until my birth, she was a stripper, and she had me at 20 years old, which is very young. And I, at 20 last year, sort of started to reevaluate, wow, what does it mean to be 20, to be at an institution of higher education, getting a degree, talking about sexuality in my work, exploring my identity, carrying this body around, and thinking about my mother, who also at 20 years old was pregnant and about to have me. And so I started to finally ask the questions around my mother's life, because when she passed away when I was 12 years old, I stopped, sort of I stopped growing and stopped seeing her as you do when you grow up with your parents in your lives. I stopped and I only saw her as a 12-year-old saw her. And I heard the stories of my father and my grandmother and my aunt, and I wanted my own story. I wanted to know my mother from my own eyes. And so I had to start asking questions about why she was a sex worker, how long she was a sex worker, where she was a sex, where everything about it. And so that's a lot of what my work is about, exploring that trauma, which is also generational trauma, because I know that through my own experiences, that I carry so much of that unresolved grieving that she didn't get to go through, that unvalidated experience, those things that were not recognized, were not identified. And I know that up until a year ago, I didn't even use the word trauma to describe the things that I had seen or experienced until finally someone said to me, no, that is trauma, and use that language with me so that I could name it, identify it, and move forward. Because that's what's so important in trauma, is that we listen and that we share. And part of sharing is listening. And a part of sharing is knowing when it's important for you to speak, and when it's important for you to shut up and listen, and when it's important for you to understand the space that you take up and to not take so much of it. It's also to understand that we live in a system that's not only a patriarchy, which privileges men over women, but privileges white people over people of different races and ethnicities. And so it's also important to know when you're taking advantage of that system which privileges your voice over others, and it's important to stop and listen so that you can learn. And it's a very important lesson that I have to constantly check myself on every day, and that I have to integrate in part of my healing process. As much as I'm sharing my story, I'm also hearing the stories of others, and that's really important. And I think I'm seeing in women my age, or females my age, where there's what I call an epidemic of real problems with their reproductive systems. Hormonal imbalances, ovarian cysts, there are lots of things happening that I think are contributing to this, which is what you're talking about, like, GMOs in our food, but also I think it is related to trauma and what's happening and what's happened and how that's being pushed into my body and how I'm carrying that. And I think it was really amazing when in the first panel there was that conversation around mothers who are sexually abused and breastfeeding, and that correlation of healing, because I think that's so fascinating, because I feel that my mother passed away and I was born from her body, and now I know she's not physically informed, but she's with me every day. She's with me right now, actually. And I hear her all the time, just as I hear the plants who speak to me, and I hear their screams, and I hear my mother's screams, not only by her speaking to me, but I hear it in my body. And so I think that it's important that as we move forward, we start to recognize and validate this generational trauma that exists for me, and I see it in other women. And I think I have lots of personal experience. I mean, I was on birth control for 2 years, and then I went off of it, and then I had all these hormonal problems, and a lot of doctors told me, you need to go back on birth control. You have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. You're never going to have children unless you come to us and we help you. Your body's incapable. And I knew that was wrong, and I knew that it wasn't true, because my body is so smart and it has such an intellectual power if I let it, and if I explore it, and if I give power to it, if I name it, if I listen to it. And so I've done so many things: acupuncture, herbal medicine, the Arvigo myabdominal massage. But the most important thing out of all of these things is the power that I've given my own self and my own voice, and the power that I use when I share, and the power that I enact through my work, despite the fear that I constantly see in others because I'm talking about something like trauma. So, thank you.
Thank you to all of you for sharing those incredible stories. I think what I'd like to do is open up a slightly a controversial question, because I think that, and I'm basing this on what I've heard from the other panels today, but from what I know of the panelists here. And one of the things, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about incredible stories and methodologies for healing trauma. But one of the things that has come up is this idea of countering mainstream medical practice evidence and by producing our own evidence. And I know that within these stories, we also have a different type of evidence. And I especially know, because I work with plant medicine as well, that you can have evidence that shows, for example, that the plants that the Sangomas in South Africa use for healing HIV/AIDS do the same job of lowering the viral count that the antiretrovirals do. So that's evidence, and then that makes the doctors happen. But what I also know is that there's another paradigm of evidence. And in a way, I don't want to necessarily go in that market-driven mainstream way. And I want to honor that evidence. So that evidence says that this plant, when I go out to harvest it, tells me that it is going to help me and to heal me. So I want to throw that out to the panelists, because I know you all have different experiences with that. And I'm actually going to go the other way and start with Gabrielle. How would you respond to this discussion we're having about what helps, the healing, and the evidence that's necessary for that?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really important question to bring up, because I think that there's a lot of conversation that I've been witnessing, which is that we need to marry science and the past. But I want to clarify that that's not past knowledge, that's now knowledge, that when we say things like primitive or ancient, we're being offensive, because it's the knowledge of the past, it's the knowledge of the now, and it's the knowledge of the future. And so when we're talking about plant medicine and this evidence, we have to recognize that science is knowledge system, and is a system that's been structured around a patriarchal government system, culture, society. And so we have to be careful to name that, to recognize that, and to be aware that this knowledge, indigenous knowledge, plant medicine, holistic knowledge, is not on an equal playing field, and is not something you can just marry, because it's not the same perspective that's going in, and we have to respect that space, and we have to understand it. And so with evidence, I think that, it's really important to hear the individual story, to hear that each story is different, that you cannot group you can't group all white women. You can't group me as, I'm not the same as, these two women on this stage. We have three different stories to tell. And you can't group all indigenous people or all women of color. You cannot group an entire group of people, because you have to hear the similarities. We could share and rejoice in our similarities, but we also have to listen to our differences. And that's super important when you think about evidence, because evidence, sometimes we get lost in statistics, we get lost in numbers, but it's about hearing the individual stories and the individual voices that need to be shared and expressed. I was just reading this really amazing, I've actually read it a while ago, but I was rereading this great article, and I know it's a book by Audre Lorde, which is the essay is The Power of Erotics, which is really amazing, and it's about, this power within ourselves, but she also talks about how it's really important to share and what that is, and how when we share and when we rejoice and our feelings and this, non-rational feeling, and we express that, what happens there is power, and how it's not the same as pornography or exploitation. It's sharing, and equality is then created out of that relationship that's just been created. And so I think, there's a lot of evidence in personal account and story. And when I say that I hear plants, or when Claudia says that she also is working with plant medicine, and I can speak for myself, but I know that through conversations we've been having, that it's not that plants are like human beings, they are human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, that was awesome. So, intuition versus institution. That's how I see it. It's funny how those two words are very similar. Science has been structured by this one particular lens. And then intuition has been suppressed. We as human beings, the way I see it, and the way I've been taught, we have the 4 directions, the 4 seasons. We have these 4 entities within ourselves: our intellect, our physical, our spiritual, our emotional. Now we've gone from crawling on all 4s to standing on 2s. And we've gone from, a picture language to actual, voice language and written language. But what we're not getting, we need to catch up our emotionality and our spirituality. Plant people. I respect the plant nation. They are far more intelligent than we are. And they are screaming at us right now to slow down, sit down and listen to them. Now, I had this conversation with my teacher, Judy Bluehorse Skelton, who is at a First Foods conference in Washington right now. And she told me, Deanna, how do you relate to the plant people? And I said, well, Auntie, when they take a picture of us in an x-ray and our bones are glowing like that? She said, yeah. And I said, that's the sunlight. We take in the sunlight and it comes into our body and we put it in our bones. Our body puts it in the bones, and that's how we create, we convert it into, vitamin D for our bones, calcium for our bones. And that's what gives us that glow. That's what we're radiating. We're radiating light. We are light beings. That is what we are. The plant people, they take in the sunlight and they bring it into their bodies, and that's what builds them up. The plant people are also light beings. Huh, interesting. So then I'm being taught by medicine people. I'm not a medicine person, don't think that. But so what I've been doing is I've been sitting with these plants and learning about their medicine. They tell you what they do. And all of a sudden, I came to the realization that I am having a conversation with this plant people through our light exchange, through photonic energy. We put out photons, they put out photons. That's how we're talking to them. And guess what? You all have that capability. None of you are exempt from that. Because again, we are all a part of nature, not apart from nature. So that's how I relate to the plant people, right? But not every person is the same. Maybe St. John's wort will work for one person, but that doesn't work for somebody else. Maybe somebody can take ephedra, but maybe somebody can't because it could make their heart palpate too fast. And to me, when somebody is taking their herbs and you can see a difference in their energy or the way they feel, or to me, that's evidence. Does that feel good? Yes, that's evidence. Does that not feel good? Oh, it doesn't feel good. That's evidence. And 10 minutes, okay, so
I want our other panel.
all right, so intuition versus institution. I'm going with intuition.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I have this conversation a lot since I'm married to a physician, first-year resident, and kind of brainwashed from the institution in that sense. And as much as I do, as much as I am grateful for all that has modern medicine gave us, personally, in my practice and how I relate with my clients is purely intuition. Whenever I am with a mom in labor, I am not myself. I am channeling. And I sometimes don't even know what I'm saying. And I had certain experiences where I felt like I'm not in a place that I can actually say this right now because I don't really know that person that well. But something told me if I'm not saying this specific sentence or whatever right now, birth will head into a different direction. And so I started from learning from all my teachers. Elizabeth Davis was one of my teachers who really educated me about listening to my intuition, and it has helped me and my clients, the laboring moms, in so many ways that I am able to have an education on one hand that is, that uses evidence in a certain way, but also can tap into that other space that we have to go whenever we are related to birth or related to sex as well, right? It's the same thing. So we're tapping into a different sphere, into a different plane as we are supporting women in birth. And so for me, that is evidence. For me, it is evidence that I can tell a mom, this is not your mother's birth, this is your birth. And if you are now think that you have to do the same thing, you will end up exactly as your mom ended up with a C-section, but this is your birth. And it was very terrifying for me to say that to this woman because I did not feel like I was in the right place. It was my very first birth that I attended, 48 hours. And she ended up having a natural birth, and she hugged me afterwards, and she's like, I never thought that this one sentence is going to help me to overcome the obstacle that I had to get this baby out. And that really showed me that I had to come into a different space, and I cannot just use the stats and the facts. And as working in marketing for 8 years and being a journalist, I know how to fake statistics. And I know not to trust statistics because I faked so many myself. So I am just very cautious when I read numbers, and I listen to myself and see the numbers and see the evidence, and then listen to myself and compare what I feel about it, and that's how I make my decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. Do you want to answer this question? No, please. I think it's important.
So I think it's a beautiful but hard question to answer. And I think I would like to take a second to talk about how, in my perspective, science is a babbling technique, right? It seems to be in its first, I think we've worked with intuition since, humans have been humans, and science is just kind of starting. And I think that it does great things, but we have to remember and keep forward the idea that it is not perfect and it is not the only answer. And I think that once we take into consideration the vulnerability that science has, then it can be used in a more secure way. So I think this is the elements that comes to my mind. I think that at the base of every research, there's intuition, there's question, there's thoughts, right? When a researcher says, I want a hunch, right? And that is, that is part of the process, part of the scientific process. And one major problem I think that we have with science is that we get to, the funding for a lot of research gets from what can be patented. And that's a major, major problem because everything that's natural cannot be patented, and therefore it's so hard to do good and quality research because the funding is so hard. So I think that it's a system, it's a new system, it's not a perfect system, but I think that all of these elements can be taken into consideration to reflect on what we can do, what helps, what can be harmful too. I think that I come from the background of psychology, and in psychology, one of the first research that were done was, what do we do harm? Is psychotherapy harmful? And I think that's a really good question. I think that's pertinent to ask. So that's what comes to my mind.
That's excellent. I really want to thank all of you for addressing that. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I think that if we bring that back to trauma, and all of us who are working with people who are traumatized through this very specific moment of birth, we do have to remember how important it is to not do any harm, to not re-traumatize, and how difficult that is. And so most of that means that if you use the word survivor, the trauma survivor needs to have control over the story. And I know in healing my own daughter, which is an ongoing, as you must imagine, an ongoing thing, I used both science. I got on the internet and immediately found out everything I could about infant trauma, and also intuition. I used my skills as a midwife. I was changing infant colostomy bags because of all the surgeries she had to have in that first year. I was doing the warm olive oil on her perineum. I was known as the pushy American mom because I was going in the operating room or the theater to make sure that the doctors were doing exactly what needed to be done for her. But I also used story. And I said, what is the story here? And how can I let her know as a trauma survivor that this story, as powerful as it is not her whole story? That it is just one chapter of her life. And I think that that's true for all of us and all of our multiple ways of being traumatized. Both African American and Native. The African American part of myself, both of those come from intense traumas. One of having their land stolen from them, and the other of being stolen from their land. And that's intergenerational. We've only been, in the case of freedom as African Americans, less time than the 250 years we were enslaved in this country. So you talk about trauma, but it's important even with that to remember that I am writing my story. And my daughter is telling her story. And story is intuition. It's what we said. The healing and the evidence is the way in which we tell our individual stories and listen. And listen, and then the next thing to do is to listen again. We really need to listen to each other because what we're doing is we're changing each other as we tell these stories. I know that we're just on time. We have some. And I would love to take at least two questions. Can we take two questions?
If we have questions first. So if we could raise hands and I'll count numbers. All right, someone who hasn't spoken yet. Okay, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
As far as I know, I'm the only token physician in the room. And I have to say that I just really appreciate the perspective that you have shared about the relationship between science and intuition. I think it's really important to have a healthy skepticism for the very reasons you were talking about in terms of statistics. I've done a bit of research myself and read a lot of research, and so I know very much of what you speak. And you're also very correct that good science starts with intuition and a hunch and a question. I think it's really important for us to know our limitations when it comes to evaluating both intuition and science. For example, I don't hear plants. Not that, and I deeply respect people who do. And I may someday learn to be intuitive enough to be able to hear plants, but I recognize that it would not be wise for me to try to select a medicinal plant for myself or for others, because that's not my gift right now. And it's just not a skill that I have. So I think it's really important for us to not generalize to what someone else's particular perspective or gift or ability is to everyone, or that we should all be the same. That's the beauty of us all working together. But I really appreciate your different perspectives and the commonality and the uniquenesses about them. Thank you.
Sorry, Lisa, it's not a question, but it's a quick comment. You know, I had a dream a couple of years ago that we have a summit on intuition, because I've worked with obstetricians and midwives and all sorts of people. Anyway, because it's not a question. She said, ask a question. But and everybody whispers to me, well, this is how I use intuition. I mean, from obstetricians. And so it'd be really exciting to get everyone, psychologists, midwives, doctors, how do you use intuition? How does it show up? And then also telling the stories to teach other people how to use so maybe that's something we should involve in the next summit, or have a separate summit of professionals, like really professionals and people we can look up to. Anyway, sorry, not a question.
Yep, someone has a question. I'm coming over with the microphone so everyone can hear a question. We actually need it for recording.
Thank you so much. I'm a labor and delivery nurse in a hospital, along with my friends here. And we really feel like we're guardians trying to help so much, and it's such a challenge. My question is, how can we foster a woman's own intuition by the time they get to us in labor? I see grimaces like, oh God. It's really difficult because by the time they get to us, we do about between 300 and 400 deliveries a month in a 36-bed unit. It's busy. And holding sacred space for them in that way is really hard, and they come in and they want their epidural and they, give their power away. So, any suggestions?
I have an idea.
I have an idea too. No, please go
ahead.
No, go ahead.
What comes to my mind about that? There's a few points. So I'm assuming that fathers are usually present. Is that the case? Most of the time. So there's a lot of research that shows that one factor that will change drastically the outcome is if women feel safer. And partners can really play that role and give men a role. If you take, the partner and say, look, you have an immense key to change the dynamic in this birth. You be there, and then you give him tools to be there, because through my work, I get to see medical professionals, and they don't have the time to do the one-on-one, right? So, but you've got someone who's volunteering. He's free. He doesn't cost one thing, and he's really excited to do cool stuff. If you give him good tools, then they can really change how things happen. If he's able to be there and make her feel comfortable and strong. So that's the one of the elements was the dad. The other one was, between contractions, because at that point, everything's going on. But between contractions, maybe evaluate the possibility of the strength. Like, I'm going to tell you a secret right now. No one has told you that. But giving birth is powerful. Do you want to try and tap into that power? I would use the elements of power in that. It's a big secret. It's such a big secret, but you want to try that? Like, if you want, I'll stay here a few minutes, I'll talk to him, and we can, maybe we can try it. Do you agree? Like, we're going to try just a few other contractions, see if it can work. And then, sometimes when you do hiking, you look at the top of the mountain and you're like, I'm never going to get there. It's so far away. But if you say, I'm just going to go there, and then we'll reevaluate, and you climb up, and you're like, yeah, I think I can go to there, and it goes on and on. Maybe, not saying you won't, don't think about an epidural. Epidural is bad. Then you make her look at the top and say, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. But, do you think you can manage with a few others? You want to. So these were, I guess, the elements to get the power, go get it from the inside, and then with the father that's protecting that space, right? Those are the elements that comes to my mind.
Great suggestions. Yes.
But not just doulas. We have to make room for doulas who are culturally specific.
Yes.
That's right.
Culturally specific to the needs of the client. And you have to stop chatting
That's right.
And to have a doula that is culturally specific can create such a safe place.
Yeah.
A doula who can actually stand there and hum a song that your grandmama taught you
Oh.
when you didn't even know the words to that song. Well, you have the community grow them and know that they are welcome to be there.
Oh.
It's a welcoming thing. You grow doulas who look like her. You make space for that.
Thank you,
make
Claudia.
space. If you do not, we have a public health crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
For real. I mean, F Zika. I feel sorry for Zika, okay? But that ain't the one that's kicking our ass right now. That's not the one. It is how do we, for women who are having babies, for pregnant individuals who are, for pregnant individuals who are having babies in hospitals, how do we empower you who are there, who are the guardians, to be able to not lose your job? It seems like you're on our team. We work night shifts, but you
All right,
Do you have
thank you, Claudia.
Yeah.
We need to move. We need to.
Yeah, Claudia, thank you. Did you,
We actually.
Suzanne had a question too?
Okay. This is really hard because I feel like the mean girl in this room. Like everyone's like
Oh.
really excited about these conversations, but I also have other people
Yes,
who
you
are
do.
presenting. So I just want to make sure that everyone gets their time on the floor.
I
And
agree.
there is opportunity tomorrow at the rally to share more stories. There is an all-day event tomorrow. So, and please continue your conversation online. We've got hashtag, go ahead and hashtag, talk about these issues, bring them up. We're talking to the choir right here. We need insurance people. We need healthcare compliance people. You know, there's a lot of people here in these systems that we need in the conversation.
And thank you for that. And I think you're going to get our email addresses. Please feel free to get in contact with us. I want to thank the women who have shared this panel with me, and thank all of you for your attention and your wonderful input.
So I think there's one more. Is that? But
Maybe it's important before we hand off the torch, we recognize the voices that haven't spoken so much, and we allow this person to speak.
I'm with you.
Because I think there are voices that are being heard on each panel and in the audience, and so maybe we want to hear some other voices. I do.
So, all right. All right, I'm going to make a decision that makes it all go forward. I think it feels like this is a time to transition, and we'll take a break, and we'll have people continue their conversations. All voices are important. Everyone deserves to be heard, and this is a really tough place to be the timekeeper when we really need to be out in the woods in a 3-day event to share stories. But this space is a different kind of frame and space to have a different kind of conversation.